On average, 1/3 of reported work-related accidents that result in employees being off work for more than 3 days are related to manual handling injuries. Research from the ESRI estimated that in 2018, the overall cost of work-related accidents and ill health cost the state €1.8 billion. To reduce the risk of employees being injured by manual handling at work and to minimise the subsequent effect it has on both the employer and the economy, manual handling regulations have been introduced in Europe and in Ireland. The most recent regulations are known as the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work General Application Regulations 2007. These set down the employer's legal responsibility for managing manual handling under Chapter 4 of Part 2, which covers the manual handling of loads. These regulations have 3 main parts. Regulation 68 gives us the definition of manual handling. Regulation 69 gives us the duties of the employer. And Schedule 3 sets down the task factors for manual handling of loads. Now, it must be emphasised at this stage that the Health and Safety Authority have clearly stated that manual handling training on its own does not meet the requirement of Regulation 69 and will not reduce injury rates. Injury rates can only be reduced where we take a preventive approach to manual handling injuries and where manual handling training plays a supplementary role in risk management. Let's have a look at the regulations in more detail. Regulation 68 defines manual handling as any transporting or supporting of a load by one or more employees that may include lifting, putting down, pushing, pulling, carrying or moving a load which by reasons of its characteristics or unfavourable ergonomic conditions involves risk, particularly back injury to employees. When we look at this definition, it tells us that not every lifting activity is considered manual handling. Firstly, the definition only relates to employees. It also emphasises that the characteristics of the load or the unfavourable ergonomic conditions must be likely to result in injury, particularly to the back. A load refers to any object that must be lifted, moved or supported. This can include inanimate objects, animals and even people. When deciding what work activity is classified as manual handling, we need to think about the characteristics of the load. We need to know how much it weighs, where its centre of gravity is, if it has a shifting centre of gravity, does it have any sharp edges, is it hot, is it cold, is it too big or awkward to lift, or does it have any hazardous contents inside such as chemicals. If the load is small, light and easy to lift without the need to bend or twist, well then it may not be considered manual handling at all. However, we also have to review the ergonomic conditions. Even if the characteristics of the load are favourable and the load is considered safe to lift, if the ergonomic conditions are poor, well then there may still be an increased risk of injury, particularly to the back. Unfavourable ergonomic conditions may include reaching to a height, stooping down below a desk, stretching for a load, working in a confined area, very high work pace, repetitive movements, twisting at the trunk, lifting while seated, and so on. Employers have a duty to assess all work activities and identify which of those are classified as manual handling. Where a work activity is not classified as manual handling, well then the employer may need to take no action at all. However, once the employer establishes that a work activity is considered manual handling, well then Regulation 69 applies and this puts a definite responsibility on employers. Regulation 69 sets down the responsibilities of the employer in relation to how they manage manual handling. Before manual handling training is considered, the employer must take a preventive approach to the management of manual handling. This is achieved by carrying out manual handling risk assessments and implementing suitable controls. It's important to note that controls must be implemented insofar as is reasonably practicable, which means the cost of implementing controls should not outweigh the safety benefits. Regulation 69A states that the employer must firstly avoid the need for manual handling where possible, in particular by providing mechanical equipment. An example of how an employer could avoid the need for manual handling could include the automation of work processes, the use of forklift trucks, use of cranes, use of hoists, or any other lifting aid that avoids the need for manual handling altogether. (69B) states that where the need for manual handling of loads cannot be avoided, well then the employer must take appropriate organisational measures to reduce the risk from manual handling. This could include developing safe systems of work, providing additional breaks, introduction of job rotation, or even selecting the right person for the task. It could also include the introduction of handling equipment that may still require some manual handling. For example, instead of having to lift and carry boxes, they can be pushed and pulled on a pallet truck or a trolley. And while this still is considered manual handling, the solution will be much safer than lifting on its own. (69C) states whenever the need for manual handling cannot be avoided, the employer must organise workstations in such a way as to make manual handling as safe and healthy as possible. This requires the employer to implement the rules of ergonomics when designing workstations. An example could be installing conveyor belts to transport loads over a distance, providing height adjustable workbenches or packing stands to avoid the need to bend while working, providing other lifting aids such as people handling hoists, and so on. The employer must also consider health surveillance to identify vulnerable employees, for example those with existing back problems, young workers, pregnant employees, or employees who don't have the physical ability to lift safely.